Welcome to the History Maps podcast.
We are diving into the deep history of Southeast Asia today.
Right, specifically tracing the initial migrations and the early development of the Shan States.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to follow the journey of the Tai and Shan peoples. We're tracking them from the ancient river valleys of southern China down into the rugged highlands of present-day Myanmar.
And we are looking at a time frame spanning from, well, ancient migrations up until the late 16th century.
Exactly.
So think about trying to track a ghost empire. I mean, they left no great stone pyramids, no unified written legal codes.
Right, and their borders changed every time the monsoon rains shifted.
Yeah, yet they managed to conquer established kingdoms and pioneer entirely new agricultural systems in really hostile terrain.
Which is how they forged a distinct political identity that permanently altered the map of mainland Southeast Asia.
To understand the political and cultural landscape of that entire region today, you have to look closely at these early, incredibly fluid migrations, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the history of the Shan States is basically a study in how human societies adapt to extreme geographic bottlenecks.
Right.
They had to build states from the ground up and maintain resilience in a highly volatile frontier zone.
So before we look at the states themselves, we need to establish exactly who the Shan people are and where they came from.
Yeah, and right away there is an etymological puzzle here.
Because the people themselves do not traditionally use the word Shan.
No, they don't. They call themselves Tai, which basically translates to free.
Okay, so where does Shan come from?
Well, the term Shan is an exonym. It's essentially a Burmese corruption of the word Siam or Siam.
Like from Siam.
Exactly. If you look at the walls of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, there are 13th century bas reliefs there.
Right, the stone carvings.
Yeah, and they depict Thai mercenaries serving in the Khmer Empire's armies. The stone carvers meticulously detailed these soldiers, and the accompanying Khmer inscriptions refer to these troops as Siam.
And that term derives from a Sanskrit word, right? Referring to a golden or yellow skin color.
Correct. And over time, and, through the linguistic filter of the Burmese language, where the final M sound often shifts to an N, Siam just morphed into Shan.
Okay, that makes sense. But there's another theory, too, tracing the word Shan to the Chinese word for mountain.
Yeah, which makes perfect geographic sense given where they eventually settled on the Shan Plateau.
Right. But I want to address a specific historical narrative regarding their origins. Because for a long time, there was this promoted idea that the Thai people fled from a kingdom called Nan Chao.
In Yunnan, yeah.
Right, in Yunnan. Is that true?
No, that is a myth we need to dispel entirely.
Oh, yeah?
That narrative actually stems from late 19th century European accounts.
Like British colonial administrators.
Exactly. British colonial administrators and early historians essentially pieced together an Exodus story. They claim that the Thai were the rulers of the Nan Chao kingdom, and, well, when the Mongols destroyed Nan Chao in the 13th century, the Thai just fled south in a mass migration.
And local historians later adopted this narrative because it provided a really neat, unified origin story.
Yeah, but modern linguistic and historical research unequivocally rejects it. I mean, Nan Chao was a multi-ethnic kingdom, but its ruling elite were not Thai speakers.
Right, they spoke a Tibeto-Burman language.
Exactly.
So if they didn't come from Nan Chao, where does the genetic and linguistic evidence actually point?
The evidence points much further east to a vast and incredibly diverse region historically referred to by the Chinese as the Bai region.
And that encompasses present-day Guangdong, Guangxi, and parts of northern Vietnam, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And linguists, notably William Gedney, have mapped the spread of Thai languages across this whole area.
How do they do that?
Well, by analyzing consonant shifts and tonal structures across hundreds of isolated villages. And through that, linguists determined that the Proto-Thai language likely emerged in this Bai region somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 years ago.
And the genetic evidence perfectly aligns with this timeline and geography.
It does.
When we say genetic evidence, we are talking specifically about autosomal studies, right? Because standard Y DNA tracks the direct male line, and mitochondrial DNA tracks the direct female line.
Yeah.
But autosomal DNA looks at the rest of the chromosomes, which gives a much broader picture of total ancestry mixing over, generations.
And those autosomal studies are crucial here because they provide a really comprehensive view of population admixture These studies show that modern Thai populations derive from southern Chinese indigenous groups.
Like the ancient Yu people.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And they are genetically distinct from the northern Han Chinese populations.
Which confirms that the Thai linguistic and genetic roots are firmly planted in that southern coastal inland matrix, not the highlands of Yunnan.
Right. But the historical records describe this Bai region not as some, isolated, pristine homeland where the Thai language developed in a vacuum.
No, it was a highly volatile frontier zone.
Extremely volatile. It was subjected to intense pressure from expanding Chinese imperial armies.
Right, and when Chinese imperial armies pushed into this region, they didn't just bring soldiers. They recruited heavily from the diverse local populations they encountered.
Yeah, they established these administrative garrisons that operated as massive cultural mixing bowls.
And this created a situation linguists call diglossia.
Exactly. Diglossia is where multiple languages are used under different social conditions within the exact same community.
Let me make sure I understand diglossia. Is it essentially like speaking highly formal English in a corporate boardroom, because that is the language of administration and power, but then immediately switching to a dense regional slang the second you clock out and go to the pub with your friends?
That captures the dynamic perfectly. In these multi-ethnic military camps and frontier settlements, the language of the boardroom was the administrative Middle Chinese of the imperial officers.
Right.
But the pub language, the daily language of the conscripts, the local traders, the families, was just a chaotic mix.
Because people needed to communicate across ethnic lines.
Yeah, so they developed pidgin languages, mixing Middle Chinese administrative terms with local indigenous vocabularies.
And the linguistic exchange went both ways, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
Chinese dialects like Cantonese and Hakka actually emerged partially out of this exact crucible through deep, sustained contact with Thai and Yao languages in that specific frontier zone.
So you have this massive, chaotic linguistic crossroads.
Yeah.
Like a chemical crucible.
Yeah.
You have constant, intense pressure from the imperial Chinese state pushing down, forcing distinct local cultures to either merge, adapt to the pressure, or just flee.
Right.
What was the specific spark that pushed the proto-Thai to pack up and move south into Southeast Asia?
Well, it was not a single spark. And it was certainly not a single mass exodus.
Okay, so it was gradual.
Yeah, the southward migration of the Thai peoples occurred in successive waves over several centuries. The primary push factors were Han Chinese demographic expansion and highly aggressive assimilation policies.
Because the imperial court in the north continually sought to bring these southern frontier regions under direct administrative, economic, and cultural control.
Exactly. They imposed heavy taxation, forced corvée labor, and basically demanded adherence to Chinese agricultural and cultural norms.
Which naturally triggered intense and often violent resistance.
Right. There are a few specific flashpoints for that resistance. In 78 CE, there was a rebellion led by a Thai prince named Lei Lao.
But the truly massive fracture happened later, right, in the 11th century.
Yes, with the revolt of Nong Zigao. That mid-11th century revolt is a critical catalyst. It involved an estimated 200,000 combatants completely rejecting Chinese domination.
200,000, that's massive.
It is. Nong Zigao attempted to set up an independent, sovereign state, violently pushing back against the Chinese prefects and administrators.
And the logistics of organizing 200,000 fighters from a decentralized, stateless population, I mean, that indicates a massive, unified desperation to escape imperial control.
Absolutely. And the Chinese response was overwhelming, systematic military force. The brutal aftermath of that failed revolt and the subsequent pacification campaigns, which involved widespread village destruction, propelled massive waves of Thai refugees southward.
They were just seeking environments entirely outside the reach of the Chinese state apparatus.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you have hundreds of thousands of people moving over decades and centuries, they need roads.
Right.
And they utilize the river systems, specifically the Red, Black, and Ma rivers.
Yeah, those acted as natural highways leading out of Gwangju and southeastern Yunnan. Following those rivers guided them up into the highlands between Vietnam and Laos, and eventually onto the Shan Plateau.
Because rivers dictate human migration patterns, especially in dense mountainous terrain. I mean, overland travel there is physically exhausting and logistically almost impossible for large groups.
It is. But, bringing people to a new environment is only half the survival equation. They still had to feed themselves.
Right, and the Thai brought with them a very specific, highly engineered agricultural technology.
Wet rice agriculture, known as Na.
Let's focus on that engineering, because we say wet rice agriculture, but that doesn't just mean throwing seeds into a muddy puddle.
No, not at all. They sought out lowland pockets and intermontane valleys where they could fundamentally alter the landscape.
They had to build bunds, meticulously level the land to ensure even water distribution.
Yeah, and construct complex irrigation channels to control the flow of water from highland streams down into the paddies. The engineering of a Na paddy system is a massive collective undertaking.
Because it requires intensive communal labor to construct and maintain.
But the payoff is immense. Wet rice agriculture produces significantly higher caloric yields per acre than dry farming.
Which allowed the Thai migrants to support much denser populations in relatively small, confined valley spaces.
Exactly. And when they were on the slopes where water couldn't be pooled for paddies, they supplemented their food supply with high, or dry field farming.
And there's a fascinating correlation mapped by plant geneticists regarding their food supply, right?
Yeah, the cultivation zone of a specific type of rice glutinous, or sticky rice, directly maps onto the northern settlements of these Thai groups.
Because sticky rice has a different starch composition, it is extremely high in amylopectin, and it basically lacks amylase.
Right, and cultivating it requires active human selection and very specific ecological conditions, particularly the cooler climates of the northern highlands.
So the fact that the genetic map of this specific plant species mirrors the migration and settlement patterns of the Thai provides historians with a literal biological roadmap.
It really does. It demonstrates how intimately their culture, their diet, and their daily survival were tied to the specific agricultural practices they mastered and carried with them.
What does this agricultural reality mean for the societal structure of these early migrants? You have people fleeing state control, but they rely on an incredibly labor-intensive type of farming.
Well, it created a system that anthropologists call the footloose peasant dynamic.
Okay, what does that mean?
In early Thai society, the relationship between the ruler and the ruled was based on labor, not land. Because the valleys were surrounded by vast, uncultivated forests and highlands, land was abundant.
Right, so human labor was the actual scarce resource.
Exactly. If a local chief or a developing state became too demanding, like if they extracted too much grain and taxes or demanded too much corvée labor for warfare or irrigation projects, the peasants were historically footloose.
Think about how you pay your property taxes today. Your house is fixed to the ground. If the taxes double, you are stuck paying them or selling the house. But imagine if, the moment your local government became too oppressive, you could just pack up your entire house, move 50 miles into the woods, engineer a new irrigation system, and completely vanish from the government's radar.
And the Thai peasants possessed the complete set of agricultural know-how to do exactly that. They could simply abandon their lands, move deeper into the forests or further down the river valleys, and establish entirely new, self-sufficient villages.
Which must have severely limited the power of early Thai rulers.
It did. A leader had to balance the extraction of resources with the absolute need to keep their population happy enough to stay.
But they couldn't have just walked into empty valleys, though. The frontier was not a blank map.
No, it wasn't.
As the Thai migrants moved into the Shan Plateau and the Irrawaddy Basin, what happened to the people who were already living in those valleys and highlands?
Well, the region was already populated by indigenous Mon Khmer and Austroasiatic-speaking groups, and the interaction was a complex mix of gradual displacement and slow, generational assimilation.
Because the Thai, armed with their intensive wet rice agriculture, could support larger populations, right?
Yeah, larger populations and more complex, organized village structures than the hunter-gatherer or shifting cultivation societies they encountered.
So they gradually pushed the prior inhabitants to the less fertile margins, up into the higher slopes, or systematically assimilated them into Thai society.
But this wasn't a one-way street of cultural erasure, though. The Thai adopted vital local technologies.
Like what?
Well, they incorporated advanced metallurgy techniques from the indigenous groups, which significantly improved their agricultural tools and weaponry.
Oh, I see.
And they also heavily incorporated the animist rituals and local land spirits of the displaced groups into their own belief systems. This ensured they appeased the ancient spirits of their new homes.
So it's a cultural synthesis, but heavily weighted toward the incoming Thai societal structure. Now, as these Thai migrants, who we will refer to as the Shan, as they move into present-day Myanmar, pushed further into the Irrawaddy Basin, they inevitably collided with the dominant superpower of that era.
Right. The pagan empire.
The pagan kingdom, centered in the harsh, dry zone of central Burma, was the absolute hegemon of mainland Southeast Asia from the 11th to 13th centuries.
Yeah, they commanded massive armies and built thousands of grand brick temples. And as the Shan populations expanded out of the northern valleys, Pagan recognized the demographic shift pressing against its northern and eastern borders.
So they took action.
They did. During the 11th century, King Anarata of Pagan took decisive preemptive action. He established a string of 43 fortified settlements right at the foothills of the Shan Plateau.
A deliberate, highly resourced policy to create a hard military buffer zone.
Exactly. It was intended to deter northern incursions and strictly control all trade flowing down from the highlands.
But the early relationship between the Shan and the pagan empire wasn't just a military standoff across a wall of fortresses, right?
No, not at all. The Shan were integrated deeply into the pagan economy, but absolutely not as autonomous rulers or equal partners.
Right. We can trace this through epigraphic evidence. The pagan kings obsessively recorded their administration on stone inscriptions.
Yeah, and starting around 1120, the term Siam begins appearing in these records.
And in these inscriptions, the Siam do not appear as conquerors or independent traders. They appear strictly as subjects of the state.
Right, they are listed on temple dedication stones as slaves, specialized weavers, drummers for religious ceremonies, and heavily taxed agricultural laborers.
The state basically confined them to designated controlled villages with names like Wetlet and Mun Siam.
And the pagan kings also recognized the agricultural prowess of the Shan. They forcibly settled, or, well, accepted the submissive settlement of large groups of Shan and Law peoples into a highly critical geographic area known as the 11 Kuruan.
And that was the Kayaksa granary region.
Yes. Because the pagan capital was in a dry zone, it relied entirely on the artificially irrigated Kayaksa region for its food. It was the absolute agricultural heart of the pagan empire.
So by settling the Shan there, pagan harnessed their wet rice engineering skills, while simultaneously keeping a massive foreign demographic firmly under state control.
Exactly. By controlling the manpower of the Shan in Kayaksa, pagan basically controlled its own lifeblood.
But beyond the strict economic integration and subjugation, this period marks a profound ideological and cultural exchange.
It does. When the early Shan migrants arrived, they were primarily animists, organizing their societies around local spirits and ancestor worship.
Within the borders, labor camps, and buffer zones of pagan, they encountered Theravada Buddhism.
Right, and pagan didn't just practice Buddhism, it utilized Buddhism as a massive engine of state power.
The kings built towering stupas and patronized thousands of monks to legitimize their rule as universal monarchs.
And the Shan absorbed this religious framework. Over generations, they adopted Theravada Buddhism. But more importantly for their own political future, they absorbed the Burmese model of a centralized, structurally complex Buddhist monarchy.
Which provided an intellectual template for social hierarchy, bureaucratic organization, and ritual legitimacy.
Exactly. A template that the Shan leaders would heavily rely on when the geopolitical winds shifted, and they eventually built their own independent states.
So the people who would eventually become the great rivals and conquerors of the Burmese kingdoms started out as conscripted weavers and agricultural laborers within their borders.
Yeah.
How did they flip the script so dramatically?
Well, the script was flipped by a geopolitical earthquake that originated thousands of miles away, far beyond the borders of Burma.
The Mongols.
Yes. In 1253, the Mongol armies under Kublai Khan launched a massive southern campaign and conquered the Nanzhao and Dali kingdoms in Yunnan.
And this conquest just shattered the established political order of the north.
It did. The violence and displacement triggered a massive, highly accelerated new wave of Thai migration southward, pushing directly past the old buffer zones and deep into the pagan sphere of influence.
And the Mongols didn't stop in Yunnan.
No, by 1287, the Mongol forces, utilizing their highly mobile cavalry, which fundamentally broke the centralized, slower-moving pagan military structure, pushed south and sacked the capital city of Pagan itself.
They destroyed the centralized control of the empire, burned the administrative centers, and then essentially retreated back north.
Leaving behind a massive chaotic power vacuum in central Burma.
And when a centralized empire collapses, local strongmen immediately rise to fill the void.
Always. In this case, the Shan military elite, who had been gradually accumulating power and numbers within the pagan borders, stepped up.
We see the rapid rise of the three Shan brothers, Athinkaya, Yazathinyan, and Thihathu.
Yeah, they were commanders of Shan descent who had strategically built a fortified power base at a city called Minesing.
And Minesing's location was a masterstroke of geopolitical positioning, wasn't it?
It really was. It was positioned right at the foothills, granting the brothers direct access to the inexhaustible manpower of the Shan Highlands to their east.
But it was also situated right next to the Kayaksi granaries. So they had the troops from the mountains, and they controlled the food supply the Mongols had left undefended in the valley.
Exactly. They utilized both resources perfectly. In 1301, a Mongol army returned south to reassert control and besieged Minesang.
But the three brothers utilized their fortified position and their well-fed, highly motivated troops to successfully defend the city.
They held off the siege until the Mongols, suffering from disease and supply shortages, were forced to withdraw.
That victory fundamentally altered their status. I mean, they were no longer subjects of a fallen empire.
Right, they were the proven defenders of the realm, the only force capable of repelling the Mongols.
So what happened next with the brothers?
The youngest brother, Thiathu, eventually outmaneuvered his siblings and consolidated total power for himself. In 1309, he crowned himself king and built a new grand capital at Pinya.
But look at how he chose to present himself to his subjects. He didn't rule as a foreign Shan warlord imposing highland customs on a valley population.
No, he meticulously adopted Burmese cultural and religious customs to legitimize his rule to the local Burman majority.
He took the Buddhist title Dhammaraja, the righteous universal king who rules according to cosmic law.
And he also styled himself the Lord of the One White Elephant.
Let's explain why a white elephant matters. In this cultural context, an albino elephant wasn't just a rare animal.
No, it was considered a deeply sacred creature associated with Indra and cosmic kingship. Possessing one was the ultimate, undeniable proof of divine favor and legitimate royal authority.
Oh, by claiming that title, Thihathu was speaking the political language of the conquered.
Exactly. This era demonstrates the extreme fluidity of ethnic and political identity. The brothers leveraged their Shan Highland manpower and military tactics to win battles, but they seamlessly utilized ancient Burmese political traditions to rule the core dry zone.
Because they understood the mechanics of statecraft. Military force can win territory, but cultural and religious legitimacy is required to govern it without constant rebellion.
Right.
Now, while the three brothers were busy adopting Burmese customs and ruling the central dry zone, a completely different dynamic was unfolding further north.
Yeah, a distinct, purely Shan powerhouse was consolidating its strength in the highlands. This brings us to the great kingdom of Meng Mao.
Meng Mao was centered in the Nam Mao, or Ruli River Basin, and that straddles the modern, highly mountainous border of Myanmar and China's Yunnan province.
Right. Local Shan chronicles, which, blend history with origin myths, claim the kingdom was founded by heavenly descended brothers Shutkun Lu and Hu Kun Lai.
With founding dates reaching back as far as 568 or 835.
Yeah, but if we strip away the mythology and look at the hard historical reality, its true rise as a major expansionist power occurred in the 13th and 14th centuries.
It directly capitalized on the exact same post-Mongol power vacuum that allowed the three brothers to take over central Burma.
Exactly. Before we look at Meng Mao's peak military power, though, we should note the vast geographic reach of the migrations originating from this specific Mao region.
Right, there's a deeply rooted historical tradition regarding a Mao prince named Jalung Sukafa.
According to the chronicles, in 1215, after a succession dispute, he left Meng Mao with 9,000 followers, migrating westward across the incredibly dense, unforgiving Patkai mountain range.
And by 1228, he and his descendants successfully established the Ahom kingdom in Assam, in present-day northeast India.
Now, there is ongoing scholarly debate about that exact timeline, with many historians analyzing the logistics of moving 9,000 people over the Patkai range.
Which would be a nightmare.
Total nightmare. So they placed the successful Ahom migration slightly later into the 14th century.
But regardless of the exact year, it shows the sheer scale of the demographic outward pressure originating from the Meng Mao Basin.
Right. But the true golden age of Meng Mao itself began under a ruler named Sikhefa, or in the Shan language, So Kanospa.
And Sikhefa came to power around 1335, right?
Yes. He was a highly effective military strategist who recognized a shift in the balance of power. He capitalized on the waning influence of the Mongol Yuan dynasty in China.
Because the Chinese imperial court was distracted by massive internal rebellions and economic collapse.
Exactly. So Sikefa rapidly expanded his borders. He turned his attention southwest, launching devastating military expeditions against the Burmese kingdoms of Sagaing and Pingya.
The very kingdoms founded by the successors of the three Shan brothers.
Right. And the campaigns were relentless. By 1364, Sikefa's forces had caused the complete destruction of both Sagaing and Pingya.
But Meng Mao's rapid expansion inevitably drew the attention of a new, highly aggressive power consolidating to the north.
The Ming Dynasty.
Right. In the late 14th century, the Ming Dynasty ousted the Mongols from China and began pushing aggressively into Yunnan to secure their southwestern frontier and, control the lucrative trade routes.
Which led to the Ming-Meng-Mao Wars. The ruler of Meng Mao at the time, Si Lunfa, initially assessed the sheer scale of the Ming military strength and chose a path of tactical submission.
He accepted Chinese tributary titles and formally acknowledged the Ming emperor.
However, the submission was entirely a diplomatic facade. Shortly after swearing fealty, Si Lunfa launched massive attacks against neighboring Thai states that had allied themselves with the Ming.
And the Ming court in Nanjing did not tolerate the defiance.
No, they didn't. In 1388, they launched a massive punitive expedition against Meng Mao. The Ming forces were victorious, and Si Lunfa was forced to sue for peace and pay heavy war reparations.
And how exactly does a decentralized valley kingdom pay reparations to a massive empire?
Well, reparations in this context were paid in the hard currency of the frontier. Massive quantities of silver bullion, thousands of war horses bred in the highland pastures, and fully trained war elephants.
That's a severe economic extraction.
It was. But the pressure from the Ming didn't just cause external economic problems. It sparked a fascinating internal political crisis.
Right, because following his defeat, Si Lunfa recognized the technological superiority of the Ming armies. He began deliberately welcoming foreigners into Meng Mao.
Specifically seeking out Chinese soldiers, deserters, and engineers who possessed knowledge of early gunpowder technology and cannons.
He recognized that military modernization was the only way for a highland kingdom to survive against an empire.
Exactly. To understand the shock of this technology, consider what a 14th century Ming hand cannon looked like.
Right. It was a heavy bronze tube packed with volatile black powders spewing fire, smoke, and lethal shrapnel.
And to a traditional valley army used to spears and elephants, the noise and destructive power were completely terrifying.
Si Lunfa wanted that power. But this open-door policy deeply enraged the traditionalist factions within his own court.
Yes. They viewed the influx of foreigners, the strange new weapons, and the departure from traditional warfare as an existential threat to their culture and their own entrenched power base.
So the conservative faction found a leader in an official named Dao Ganmeng.
And in 1397, Dao Ganmeng staged a full-scale rebellion, successfully deposed Si Lunfa, and forced him to flee the capital.
Si Lunfa traveled all the way to the Ming capital to seek refuge. And the Ming emperor faced a strategic choice.
Right. Calculating that a dependent, reinstated Si Lunfa was infinitely better for border stability than an independent, hostile Dao Ganmeng, the Ming provided military support.
So in 1398, a Ming army escorted Si Lunfa back to Meng Mao, deployed their gunpowder weapons against the rebels, defeated Dao Ganmeng, and restored Si Lunfa to the throne as a puppet ruler.
It is a classic proxy conflict, but the imposed peace did not last. Fast forward a few decades to the 1430s under a new, ambitious ruler named Si Lunfa.
Meng Mao recovered its strength and began aggressively expanding its territory once again, pushing deep into Ming-claimed territories and disrupting imperial trade.
This triggered the Luchuan-Pingnian campaigns.
The Ming dynasty, realizing that proxy rulers and punitive raids were insufficient, committed to a massive, multi-year military undertaking.
A conflict spanning from 1436 to 1449, and these were not minor border skirmishes. This was total war.
The Ming mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops, straining their imperial logistics to the breaking point as they repeatedly marched armies into the rugged malaria-endemic terrain of Meng Mao.
The campaigns were brutally destructive and ultimately fractured the Meng Mao kingdom entirely. The Ming forces repeatedly besieged and captured the capital, systematically dismantling the kingdom's infrastructure.
And forcing Si Renfa and the royal family to abandon the Ruli Basin entirely. They retreated westward, establishing a new, much weaker power base in the region of Mengyang. Now, we have been talking about these massive military clashes, Ming imperial armies with bronze cannons facing off against Shan forces. What did a Shan army actually look like on the battlefield during this era?
How did they organize themselves to fight an empire?
Yeah.
Well, for the mechanics of their military, we can look at a highly detailed Chinese intelligence account called the Bai Zhuan, compiled by Ming envoys who visited the region in 1396.
And what they recorded is critical, right? And Shan did not maintain a standing professional army separate from the civilian population.
Right, there was no formal distinction between a farmer and a soldier. The entire society was structurally engineered for rapid mobilization.
When the Sofa called for war, the people assembled and became troops.
Right.
When the campaign ended, they dispersed and returned to their wet rice paddies.
And the draft ratio recorded by the Ming envoys was intense. Every 3 to 5 people were required to provide one fully equipped soldier.
That implies a society where military readiness is baked into the daily economic output of every single household.
It absolutely does. The tactical core of the Shan army relied heavily on war elephants.
And the logistics of that are staggering.
Yeah.
You don't easily breed war elephants in captivity. You must capture wild elephants from the dense jungles, break them, and train them for years to ignore the deafening noise and chaos of a battlefield.
Yeah. Soldiers would secure howdahs, sturdy wooden platforms on top of the elephants, using them as mobile, elevated, heavily armored firing platforms.
And the infantry marching alongside the elephants wore armor crafted from layered leather or scales of bronze and iron.
Their primary weapons were long spears for close-quarters melee and heavy crossbows for ranged engagement.
But how does a society manage that extreme level of mobilization, drafting 20 to 30% of the population, without a permanent military caste enforcing the rules?
Well, it all comes down to their internal governance structure, specifically the Sofa system.
Right. The paramount ruler of a Shan state was the Sofa, a title translating to Lord of the Sky.
And below the Sofa was a highly regimented, strict administrative hierarchy. Crucially, this hierarchy was based entirely on controlling units of people rather than strictly defining geographic borders.
The hierarchy trickled down from the top in a pyramid of ultimate accountability.
Right, below the Sofa were the Zhaomeng, who acted as high-level general administrators overseeing large regions.
And below them were officials managing progressively smaller groups, all the way down the chain to the Zhaozhen, an official who was directly responsible for controlling, taxing, and mobilizing just 10 individuals.
And this microscopic chain of command was essential because the Shan did not rely on complex, written legal statutes like the Chinese Penal Code.
Order was maintained through strict, universally understood customary law.
Minor infractions were handled rapidly through monetary fines, but serious crimes such as treason, murder, or desertion were punished by death.
And the execution methods were highly performative and intended to act as absolute deterrents to the rest of the population.
Yeah, the texts detail executions by elephant trampling or systematic drowning. The Ming observers specifically noted with somewhat shocked admiration that crimes like adultery and theft were punished so severely that the population rarely dared to commit them.
The fear of the law was absolute.
It was.
Let's talk about how kinship and gender roles functioned within this highly militarized environment.
Well, society was strictly patrilineal. Men completely dominated the public spheres of warfare, legal adjudication, and high-level governance.
Succession of the Safas passed exclusively through the male line.
However, we must look at the actual economic reality of the household to understand how the society functioned while the men were constantly mobilized.
Right, because while men were drafted for war or tied up in administration, the women managed the domestic economy.
And this wasn't just basic subsistence farming. Historical records point out that women managed the intense domestic production, specialized in intricate textile weaving, and crucially, they dominated the petty trade in the local valley markets.
Because they controlled this daily commerce and the cash flow of the household, women held a notable degree of financial autonomy and practical power within the family structure.
Exactly. Now, if we connect this hyper-local administrative and social structure to the broader geopolitical reality of Southeast Asia, we see what political scientists call the mandala model of statecraft in action.
The Shan states did not function like modern nation-states with hard borders. They functioned as a decentralized, overlapping network of chiefdoms.
Think of the mandala model like a Wi-Fi router.
Right.
If you're standing right next to the router, the Sofa's court, The signal of his power is absolute. He collects all the taxes and commands absolute obedience.
But the further you walk away from the capital, up into the rugged mountains, the weaker his signal gets.
Eventually, the signal drops out entirely, or you find yourself picking up the signal of a different Sophist network. Borders were highly fluid, expanding and contracting based purely on the military strength of the center at any given moment.
Because of this fluidity, allegiances between the various Hmong, or principalities, were constantly shifting based on who offered the best protection or the most wealth.
Right. They maintained this power not just through wet rice agriculture, but by controlling vast wealth generated by taxing long-distance highland trade routes.
They controlled the flow of tea, highly prized mountain horses, and precious gems moving between China, India, and Burma.
When a So'ofa needed additional military force for a valley war and couldn't draft any more of his own farmers, he utilized that trade wealth to hire local hill tribes.
They heavily employed the fierce Kachin peoples from the extreme north as kafak, or mercenaries, directly integrating highland tribal warriors into their lowland political disputes.
So this decentralized, shifting, but highly militarized network of states eventually unified just enough to strike back at the heart of the Burmese world once again.
In the early 16th century, the political landscape shifted dramatically. The major Shan states of Munian, Mogan, Bamo, and Kale realized they shared a common enemy and formed a powerful, unified military confederation.
This alliance was led by Solon, the highly aggressive and capable Sofa of Monian.
And Solon focused the combined strength of the Highland Confederation on the Ava Kingdom, which was the dominant Burman power in the central dry zone at the time.
In 1527, Solon's confederation marched south and successfully sacked the capital of Ava. This was a monumental event.
It completely ended a long period of Burman dominance in the upper dry zone. Having conquered the center, Solon installed his own son, Thombwa, on the throne of Ava to rule over the Burman majority.
But the rule of Thombwa highlights a stark contrast in how different generations of Shan interacted with Burmese culture.
Right. 2 centuries prior, the 3 Shan brothers had meticulously assimilated, adopting Burmese Buddhism and royal titles to legitimize their rule.
Thombwa took the exact opposite approach. He was deeply hostile to the Burman elites and their entrenched religious institutions.
He viewed the wealthy Buddhist monasteries not as sources of legitimacy, but as massive reservoirs of untaxed wealth and potential centers of rebellion.
So Thombwa infamously initiated a brutal purge of the Buddhist establishment. He massacred prominent, highly respected Buddhist monks, ordered the burning of irreplaceable sacred scriptures, and systematically looted and destroyed religious buildings.
He attempted to rule through absolute terror and the dismantling of the local culture, rather than through assimilation.
And that approach is historically unsustainable. You cannot govern a massive population purely through terror while actively destroying their most sacred institutions.
It sparked a fierce, inevitable, and highly organized backlash from the local population.
The Burman elites, who had gone into hiding or fled to the peripheries, rallied behind a commander named Minji Yano.
They orchestrated a massive coordinated revolt in 1542. They successfully assassinated the Thombwa, bringing a violent end to his reign of terror.
What is fascinating is that the Burmans didn't immediately expel all Shan influence after the assassination. They recognized the military reality of the Shan confederations.
In fact, they showed a clear preference for a different kind of Shan ruler. The Burman elites actively invited the Shan rulers of Sepah, a state also known as Ungbung, to come south and take the throne of Ava after Thombwa's death.
The Sepah Shans represented the alternate approach. Unlike the aggressive, iconoclastic Munian faction, the Sepah Shans were devout Theravada Buddhists.
They had heavily intermarried with Ava royalty over several generations and shared significant deep cultural values with the Burman majority.
The fact that the Burmans actively invited them to rule demonstrates the extreme complexity of ethnic relations during this period. It wasn't simply a monolithic war of Shan versus Burman. It was about religious alignment, cultural compatibility, and stable governance.
But this complex, centuries-long web of shifting confederations, proxy wars, and cross-cultural alliances was about to be completely swept away.
The era of independent Shan dominance in central Burma came to a definitive end with the rise of the Tungu dynasty in the south.
King Bayanang of the Tungu dynasty was arguably the greatest military conqueror in Burmese history. He built an unprecedented war machine.
In 1557, he launched a massive, systematic campaign targeting the fragmented Shan states one by one.
His forces, bolstered by Portuguese mercenaries and modern firearms, were overwhelming. The Valley States could not withstand the sheer scale of the Tungu armies.
But Bainong was a supreme pragmatist. After conquering the states, he recognized the absolute impossibility of imposing direct, centralized bureaucratic rule from his lowland capital over a vast, mountainous, malaria-ridden plateau.
So, he didn't try to install Burmese governors in every village. Instead, he instituted a strict tributary system.
And the mechanics of this system are vital. The Safofas were allowed to retain their local autonomy, they kept their customary laws, their execution methods, and their complex Zhao Meng administrative structures.
However, the cost of that internal autonomy was absolute subjugation to the center. The Sulfas were forced to travel to the Tungu court, drink sacred water, and swear absolute binding oaths of loyalty to the Burmese throne.
They were required to pay heavy, regular tribute, which stripped the wealth from their trade routes. This tribute included the delivery of prime war elephants, massive quantities of gold and silver, and quotas of human slaves for the Burmese capital.
This arrangement permanently altered the balance of power in mainland Southeast Asia. The Shan States were officially subjugated to the Burmese center, a dynamic that would define the region's politics for centuries.
We've tracked centuries of movement, from the linguistic and genetic crucible of the Bai region, down the river highways, engineering wet rice paddies, through the fortress buffer zones of pagan, into the rise of gunpowder empires, and the fall of massive elephant-mounted confederations.
It leads to a crucial realization about the true nature of power, geography, and human organization.
Yeah, the grand expansionist armies, the war elephants, and the lofty Lord of the Sky titles of the independent Shan states eventually submitted to massive, centralized external empires like the Ming and the Tungu.
But the incredibly resilient, microscopic social structures the Shan built, the localized Hmong administrative system, the strict customary laws, and that highly adaptable blend of valley wet rice agriculture and highland trade did not disappear.
In fact, those hyper-local structures remained largely intact, operating silently beneath the imposing umbrella of overarching empires for another 400 years.
Consider how geography and hyperlocal identity can sometimes prove far more enduring than the centralized empires that claim to conquer them. The Ming dynasty and the Tungu Empire drew massive borders on their imperial maps, but the daily reality of the people in the valleys was dictated by the Hmong. Think about the invisible borders laid down by ancient migrations, agricultural adaptations, and centuries-old languages. How do the invisible borders in your own history still shape the modern world you live in today?
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.